boy. Okay. Making sure everything is doing what it's supposed to. Whoa. Okay. That should work. Okay. And I will try to keep my eye on chat and all those fun things. Okay. So it is fairly visible, hopefully. Yeah, fairly visible. All right. So welcome to Whitney Writes a Book. I am Whitney Sybil. I write mostly romance, contemporary romance, usually in the young adult genre, I guess you subgenre. Young adult meaning people over the age of 18, 19 years old. And I wanted to talk about a little bit about, before we really get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about authors using their own experience to hold on, why is it doing that? Okay, authors using their own experience to write, and I can guarantee you for a fact that if you know a writer, you've been in their book probably. If you know them well, I guess you could say, or if you're a big personality, you probably ended up in their books somewhere. It's just kind of the nature of the game. We use what we know as fodder for our characters and for motivations and all that other fun stuff. So, and I think the reason I wanted to bring this up was because I've been working on what I will call a passion project. It's probably not something I will publish, although I can't say that. I won't ever say never say never. But it's a very personal story to me, and for sure I keep thinking in my head as I'm writing this, I'm like, the people that I used to know that I am writing about would recognize themselves in a second. They would know exactly who I was talking about and what we were doing at the time, and all of that, all of sort of that silliness that comes about. So that's been on my mind quite a bit, is using the things that I've experienced in my life to write with. So anyway, what we are trying to accomplish today is, it's kind of a toss-up at this point. I need one of the major concerns that I had with Dark Mountain was that, first of all, and we discussed this last time, that David's feet is not held close enough to the fire. There's not a whole lot of reason for him to want to change. Not that she really let him get away with a whole lot, but It's more, um, Hannah needed a really solid reason for, number one, ditching him entirely at first, and then two, wanting him to take him back. And I had a conversation with somebody in one of my writers groups, and I was saying, you know, the idea of the heart wants what the heart wants, to me, is a writing cop out. It just basically says you just wanted these characters to get together and you couldn't think of a really good reason for them to be together, or the reason they're being together is probably terribly unhealthy, so I'm just going to write it like that. And the thing is that I didn't really want to go there because I wanted, part of the whole reason I started Dark Mountain is I wanted to not only feature a character with a disability, but a character with a disability who is a strong personality. She knows what she wants. She's trying to get it. She may not make the right choices for those things all the time, and for sure she makes mistakes on the way to the end of the novel, but she doesn't just let things happen. Like there's a little bit in there where she kind of lets things happen to her, but I think that I can justify that by saying that when we're in our young 20s, like after high school, not quite hitting 25 yet, so we may not have started a career quite yet. I think there is that tendency to allow things to happen to you rather than you standing up and saying, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen that way. Especially when it comes to love. I don't know. Maybe that's my own experience with the travails of the dating world pre my marriage, but it almost seemed like a lot of girls were willing to put up with a lot before they finally had enough and was like, I'm okay, I'm done. I'm okay with that. I'm finished. And I think that that's just a part and parcel of growing up and learning that you don't have to put up with that kind of garbage from a guy, and or a girl for that matter. I've seen it go both ways. So what I'm trying to do now, and I'll be honest, I'm starting out with this particular chapter because it's one of my favorites. This is the chapter where Hannah meets David for the first time. She's worked for him for almost a year at this point, and she's never met him. And kind of the backstory for that is that David is a creature of convenience, and he's a workaholic at the same time. That's kind of the only fulfillment that he's ever found in his life. And so when he works hard. And because he's a creature of convenience, he actually has an apartment that he rents downtown so that he doesn't have to drive all the way up Immigration Canyon to go home. He just stays at the apartment and then goes back to work the next day. And as long as Addie is being taken care of, he's not too concerned about whether he's mindful of her missing him, but it's sort of like, well, I'm providing for her, so she'll just have to deal with the circumstances as they are, kind of deal. Of course, we want to show David that that's not necessarily, like, it changes for him when he meets Hannah, obviously. When you find yourself intrigued by someone, it's hard to just say, I'm going to keep going back to what I'm doing. That can't happen. So now we have the challenge. Obviously, I knew how it was going to work out because this is based on Jane Eyre. the challenge was to bring his injury up to the standard of today. But well, it really wasn't that hard of a challenge. But one of the things that I struggled with is how am I going to get him to injure himself, and kind of do that whole scene where he practically runs her over, and because obviously we're not riding around on horses anymore, and the whole deal was he had come up on her in the midst of the evening and practically ran her over with his horse. The horse reared up and landed on his ankle and sprained his ankle, which then forced him to stay at the house, and that's how they got to know each other. So fast forward to the 2000s, and now we have to figure out how that can happen. And so I came up, it actually served a couple of purposes with the answer that I came up with, because it becomes a special place for Hannah. There's this path that leads from the patio garden area in the back of the house, and it was paved all the way in this huge kind of misshapen circle to then connect to the road that leads to the house. And so we're talking January-ish. So we're also talking about, let's see, Salt Lake is what, sitting at like, I don't know, hang on one sec. Okay, well, that's not helpful. Anywho, this path is sort of like Hannah's sanctuary. And Addie likes it too, mostly in the summertime, but in the wintertime, Hannah likes to take it around just to be with her own thoughts, and I think she discovers that as a 20-year-old or 22-year-old, that it's not the easiest to be at home all day long with nobody to talk to really except an 11-year-old autistic girl. So she uses this time on the circle to kind of just, be on her own and think about things. And so this is where we lead into the accident. And and one of the things that I had to decide was I needed David to have an accident that put him out of commission for quite a while, but not so much that he would be spending a lot of time at the hospital, because the whole point is to keep him at the house, because he wouldn't get to know Hannah very well if he wasn't there. So I came up with the idea of a torn ACL. And if you have ever known anyone that's had a torn ACL, it is probably one of the worst and most obnoxious injuries you can have. And the reason I say that is because not only does it affect, it puts you out of commission for quite a long time, actually. The information that I looked up when I was doing the research for it said that depending on how long it takes you to get into surgery, you are then out of commission for the next almost 2 months after that surgery. And you can't do anything. Once that surgery takes place, your butt is either in a wheelchair or it's in you're sitting on your couch or your bed or whatever. So it's a pretty intense injury. It's also going to be the injury that just annoys David to death, because it's one of those injuries where he can't do anything about it. He can't tell the doctor, I'm not listening to you, because if he'd like to walk again properly, he's going to do what the doctor tells him. So, and I'm going to kill my son. So hang on one second. Isaac?
Yeah?
This is not the time.
But I'm going to be making myself food.
Okay, but that could have been done like an hour ago. No, do something else for food. Nuke some ramen or something. Well then, no. Anyway. So we've got the torn ACL. How was I going to do the torn ACL? Usually a torn ACL comes from, usually it's a sports injury. He's not a sporty guy, so how do you get him? And the reason it's a sport injury is because a lot of times what it is you're basically hyperextending your knee to the side. You're basically twisting your leg or your knee, and the ligament right there either comes off the bone or it tears. But if you're not a sporty person, that's kind of a hard thing to do. And then what was it? I was watching a movie where the guy was being in, like, it must have been a Hallmark or something, because the guy was being a dork, and he was trying to show off for the girl, and then he slips and falls and hurts himself a little bit. Was it? It might have been While You Were Sleeping. That might have been it. Anyway, so he falls and he hurts himself. I think While You Were Sleeping, he just tears his jeans, but, you know, I was thinking, oh, well, that kind of makes sense, because if he slips and falls, you generally don't tear your ACL. But if he's near his car, there is a very real possibility that could happen. And so then that's where the idea for him, before getting back in his car to head back to the house, he catches his leg on a patch of like slush or snow, and then his leg slides under the car and catches on the wheel, and then that's how it twists like that. And it's also kind of a funny thing, because you don't expect it, and he's so gruff at first, you know, he's like, rah, 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 rah. And then all of a sudden you hear this yipe. So anyway, so I need to fix some of this stuff, because I really wanted to drive home the fact that regardless of his bad attitude, I guess you could say, he and Hannah would be really good for each other. Oops.
What? Yes. Why? Yes.
Right, so I'm going to read through some of this while I decide what, if anything, I'm going to change. So a little more snow fell right after Christmas, making it... Okay, guys?
Yeah?
I'm serious.
I need to wash my book.
They haven't been in the kitchen all day, literally. Haven't been in the kitchen all day. I start streaming, and they're in here like... Actually, it's not. You haven't... Yeah, but literally all the rest of the day. Alright, so you need to be quiet. Another thing that I need to be looking out for too is I am terrible at passive voice. Terrible at it. I think it's just my brain gets going so quickly that I just need to get the words out, and I'm not really concerned about the appropriateness of my grammar per se, or whether or not I'm using strong verbs. So I may be fixing some of that as we go along, because I know for a fact that if I submit this to an editor or a agent, that's probably the first thing they're going to pop it right back at me, if they're even interested at all, and being like, you need to fix all these sentences. Like, what? Because it would nearly be a sentence by sentence. So, that being said, all right, so a little more snow fell right after Christmas, making it easier to get back to our pre-Christmas routine. January came in blustery and cold. Despite the sun shining through the wispy, and this is a sentence I don't like, so we'll probably change it. Despite the sun shining through the wispy clouds, the bite in the air made noses red and pierced through even the thickest coats. How can we fix that sentence? Okay, so how about a pale sun shone through wispy winter clouds that the light in the air let's see, pierced thickest coats and nipped at the ends of noses. Does that sound okay? Alright, so a pale sun shone through the wispy winter clouds. The bite in the air pierced the thickest coats and nipped at the ends of noses. I don't know how I feel about that last part of the sentence. Let's see. How about the bite in the air pierced the thickest coats, or pierced through the thickest coats, and reddened the ends of I just don't like the way that's coming out. I want to say that because in Utah it's a dry heat, or it's a dry cold, and one of the problems with dry cold is that it really sucks the moisture out of your skin pretty quickly, and so your skin actually reddens quicker than if you were in a moist cold. So let's see. Redden the ends of chapped the tips of your nose. The bite in the air pierced through the thickest coats and chapped the tips of your nose. That's sounding a bit better. The bite in the air pierced through the thickest coats and chapped the tips of noses. So, and here we are, and this is an example of showing, telling and not showing. So I looked out the window near the main doors. I couldn't shake an antsy feeling that had come over me lately. I couldn't decide if it was because it was just cabin fever or if it was something else. I need an office. That's what I need. I can just go in the office and shut the door. We're going to change the sentence to, we want to show that she's feeling antsy. Because by January, February, particularly February in Utah, you're starting to get a little antsy. So let's see. How can we put that? Examine the expense of white lawn. No, I don't want to do that either. Okay. Nothing. Entertains me for long. I placed between the couch, kitchen, and looking out the large windows at the front of the house. And even books. Okay, she's a reader. So nothing entertained me for long, not even my books. I paced between the kitchen and looking out the large windows at the front of the house. I couldn't decide if it was because it was just cabin fever or if it was something else. I'm going to probably change that sentence too. So how about I ask myself, was it cabin fever or something else? As much as I loved my job, it didn't give me much time to have a social life. In fact, since I had graduated from college, I really didn't have a social life. Without the immediacy of my sorority sisters and their parties and activities, I had nothing to do. I didn't like bars and clubs, and I didn't want just the depressing rejections I would inevitably get from trying to Tinder or any other dating site. Okay, so as much as I love my job, it didn't give me much time to have a social life.
Hey, Mama. I love you.
Me too, but I'm busy. Without the immediacy of my sorority sisters and their parties and activities, I had nothing to do. I didn't like the bars and clubs, and I didn't want the depressing rejections I would inevitably get from trying to Tinder or peddling any other dating site. True story. Second they find out you're in a wheelchair, they're like, whoa, I'm out of here. And that's fine. Their loss. Okay. Let's see. I was poison ivy the second I mentioned the wheelchair. Probably the most depressing thing that depressed me the most well, this, we're going to change this sentence. More than my inability to find a date trying to say that that not having her sorority sisters around or even maintaining a relationship with her hurt more than her not being able to find a date. So let's see. What is the lack of continued camaraderie with my sorority sisters hurt more than my inability to get a date. Okay. No judging. Okay. The lack of continued camaraderie with my sorority sisters hurt more than my ability to get a date. moved on with their lives, getting married or starting their careers. I sat with a little girl and a housekeeper for company. Yeah, that sounds a little better. Nothing entertained me for long, not even my books. I paced between the kitchen and looking out the large windows at the front of the house. Was it cabin fever or something else? As much as I loved my job, it didn't give me much time to have social life. Without the immediacy of my sorority sisters and their parties and activities, I had nothing to do. I didn't like bars and clubs, and I didn't want the depressing rejections I would inevitably get from trying to Tinder or peddling any other dating site. I was poison ivy the second I mentioned the wheelchair. The lack of continued camaraderie with my sorority sisters hurt more than my inability to get a date. They moved on with their lives, getting married or starting their careers. I sat with a little girl and a housekeeper for company. Okay. Brenda was kind, but she was also busy. Period. I felt guilty. Let's see. I felt guilty when I engaged her in conversation. Let's see. She liked to keep busy and extended conversation kept her from doing her job. She did, sensing I needed a break, offer to watch Maddie for me if I wanted to go on an errand or get out of the house. I need to change that sentence too. That's crap. Sensing I needed a break, she offered to watch Addie for me sometimes. Encouraged me to go do errands or just get out of the house. There seemed to be a slight emphasis on the phrase, get out of the house. Not wanting to take advantage of her generosity, we're not going to assume there was a slight emphasis. She encouraged me to go do errands or go shopping to get me out of the house. There was a slight emphasis on the phrase, get out of the house. Not wanting to take advantage of her generosity, it became a habit to just go on a walk around the wood path for a while and get some sun and exercise. Okay, we need to fix that too. So let's see. So let's see. It took too much time to be constantly driving downtown just for an errand or two. Errands seemed to take too long. Wanted to make sure I wasn't taking advantage of Brenda's generosity. So I opted to taking walks alone in the late afternoons. Would it be well, not inappropriate, but like kind of dorky to say taking a walk, because obviously she's not walking. But how would you say that? Like, so I opted to traverse is sort of a dorky word. Meandering. Meandering might be a good one. Through the woods. Okay, so sensing I needed a break, she offered to watch Addie for me sometimes. She encouraged me to go do errands or go shopping to get me out of the house. There was a slight, how about we do this? With an emphasis on the phrase, get out of the house. Errands seemed to take too long. How about errands took too long? Errands took too long. I didn't want I didn't want to take advantage of Brenda's generosity, so I opted to meandering alone in the late afternoons through the woods. Okay, much better. Got out of the house and I got exercise at the same time. Okay. Addie and I worked so hard on her science project that it was well after lunch before I noticed the time. Are you going on your walk today? Brenda asked me. Oh, yeah. I think I'll get that in before it gets dark, I said. Is that okay? I don't want to hold you up before you can get dinner done. No, it's not a problem, she said. Addie seems like she's keeping herself busy. Just go and I'll have dinner ready before you get back. Brenda, you're the best, I said, giving her a smile. I'm going to take out the sentence because I suddenly hate it a lot. Put my coat and gloves on before I got outside and before Addie noticed I was leaving. Sometimes, if it was still light outside, I'd have to do some serious bribing to get her to stay at the house. She couldn't understand that sometimes a person just needed to be alone with their thoughts. Hadn't noticed I was leaving. So I threw my coat and gloves on as I opened the patio and went outside. Patio door. And went outside. Addie hadn't noticed I was leaving. Sometimes, if it was still light outside, I'd have to do some serious bribing to get her to stay at the house. She couldn't understand that sometimes a person just needed to be alone with their thoughts. Okay. I'm gonna get rid of that. I hurried to get to the start of the path. How about I just say, get rid of that and just say, I breathed in the crisp, clear air, the kind you can only get this high up on the mountain. It was the kind you can only get this high up on the mountain. But it smelled. Because I don't know if you've ever had that experience. If you don't have real mountains around you, I don't think you can actually appreciate what that smells like. And maybe I should go into a little more detail because it's almost like the closest I can come to it is if you've chewed like or if you've just gotten finished eating an Altoid or a really intense peppermint gum, and then try to either take a big deep breath in or actually take a sip of water afterwards. It's just that really, what's the word I'm looking for? Intense. That's what I'm. It's that really intense but cleansing kind of air that comes up in through your sinus and down into your lungs, and it just feels really, really good, even though it's really, really cold. And that's why I say it's crisp and it's clear, because, you know, once you get up probably about another 500 uh, feet of altitude, coming up out of the Salt Lake Valley and then heading up towards Park City in the Wasatches, you get rid of all of that smog and garbage that tends to accumulate during the wintertime, and then you've just got that clear air that, I mean, you literally can, it literally is like the trees are breathing and creating this amazing, you know, cleansing air that has a slight kind of woodiness to it as well, because obviously if you're up in the mountains, you're going to have pine trees and maples, and here in Utah we have maples and ash, and no, not ash, aspen, a lot of aspen, pine trees, and those sort of things. So that all combines with that scent that if you've never been on a real mountain before, you probably wouldn't get any of that because it's not high enough up. And if you've ever been to Utah, you'll know that those things are mountains. They're not hills in the slightest. They're huge. All right, so let's see. Maybe we should do this. Perfumed. Oops. With hint of pine and see, perfumed with a hint of pine and aspen. It crackled pleasantly in my lungs. Breathed in the crisp, clear air, perfumed with a hint of pine and aspen, it crackled pleasantly in my lungs. We might come back to that one. The woods were quiet this late in the afternoon. How about actually, we're going to take this sentence out entirely because I can see we have a similar sentence downstairs of that. Minuscule ice crystals lingered in the air, reflecting the light from the setting sun, giving the pathway a fairy-like look. Let's see, we're going to take out Sounds of birds and other small animals. Oh boy, what's this verb I want to use there? And this is funny too. This is another thing that I've noticed about being up in a mountain, in the mountains like the Wasatches, is that even though you have all these little sounds like birds fluttering in the branches of the trees and little squirrels and other small animals, jumping from branch to branch, doing their thing, and maybe you might even have a little bit of air blowing through. There's a very profound sense of quiet that you don't get in the city, because in the city you've got sirens and cars and horns and just the bulk of people. But when you go out into the woods where there's not a whole lot of civilization, it's the loudest silence you've ever heard. That sounds cheeseball, but that's really what it is. It's a very, you notice it right away. It's like, oh, it's really quiet out here, like really quiet. So let's see. Skittering, that's a good one. The sounds of birds flitting and other small animals skittering in the branches above did nothing to dampen the sound quiet. Even the wind pumping down the mountain. Let's see. And there's a purpose actually to wanting to emphasize the quiet, because we are going to come from this idyllic, quiet, peaceful feeling to a lot of chaos all of a sudden. So let's see, this is profound quiet. Purposefully ran over patches of ice on the path so I could hear the way the ice and crusty snow crunched under my tires. Okay, so let's read that back. Minuscule ice crystals lingered in the air, reflecting the light from the setting sun, giving the pathway a fairyland-like look. The sounds of birds flitting and other small animals skittering in the branches above did nothing to dampen the profound quiet. A cold wind whipped my face, and I purposefully, we'll get rid of the and. How about we just get rid of the cold wind altogether? All right. Profound quiet. I purposefully ran over patches of ice on the path so I could hear the way the ice and crusty snow crunched under my tires. All right, this is the last of the winter sun dipped below the sight line of the Wasatch Mountains. It was later than I thought. Okay, actually we're going to start here. The trees' shadows stretched across the main road to the house, lengthening as okay. The tree's shadows stretched across the main road to the house, lengthening as the last of the winter sun dipped below the sight line of the Wasatch Mountains. It was later than I thought. Came to the part where the path met the road to the house. Okay, that's dumb, because we already established that. See, I paused a moment on the road to catch my breath. The decreasing temperature made it harder to get a good lungful in. Decreasing. A noise unfamiliar noise floated up and down the hill. Okay, so trees' shadows stretched across the main road to the house, lengthening as the last of the winter sun dipped below the sight line of the Wasatch Mountains. It was later than I thought. I paused a moment on the road to catch my breath. Breathe. Burp. Okay. The decreasing temperature made it harder to get a good lungful in. An unfamiliar noise floated up from down the hill. I listened. It sounded like a car coming up the road, but I couldn't be sure. I rolled out further onto the road to see if I could see anything. The car lights were shining upon me faster than I thought possible. Let's see, the car lights shone directly upon me faster than I thought possible. How about faster than I could react? Shown. I'm not sure I want to use the word shown. I want to say that instead of shown, I want to say something more to the effect that the like blazed, so it blinded her, so she was kind of like a deer in a headlight, where all of a sudden this car's coming up on her from the road, and the lights dazzled. Dazzled me to inaction. Does that sound too cheesy?
Interior crocodile engine. Outside the Chevrolet movie theater.
The car lights dazzled me into inaction. That sounds weird, doesn't it? Brakes screeched as the car swerved to avoid running me over. At first I thought it was Cheryl, and I was ready to apologize. But instead of a champagne-colored Lexus, it was a black sedan I had never seen before, entitled sitting diagonally on the drive ahead of me. I don't like that sentence either.
Sorry.
First, I thought it was Cheryl, was ready to apologize, but instead of a champagne-colored Lexus, it was a black sedan I had never seen before. idled, parked at an angle on the drive ahead of me. Okay, that sounds a little better. Sounded like a car coming up the road, but I couldn't be sure. I rolled out further onto the road to see if I could see anything. The car lights dazzled me into an action. Brakes screeched as the car swerved to avoid running me over. At first I thought it was Cheryl and I was ready to apologize, but instead of a champagne-colored Lexus, it was a black sedan I had never seen before. It idled, parked at an angle on the drive ahead of me. Okay, now we get to meet David, and I'll pre-warn you right now that, like I said the last time, David is heavily based on Orson Welles as a person, not necessarily his interpretation of Mr. Rochester, because he actually did play Mr. Rochester in like the 1943 version of Jane Eyre. But it's based on him as a person, because he was an interesting duck, I'll tell you. He was insanely smart. He was genius level intellect, and people with genius level intellects tend to be sort of impatient with other people, short, if you will. And not only that, but he was a very demanding director. He expected a lot out of the people that he worked with, but at the same time, he could be very funny too. So kind of that's where I got my idea with, but I totally crush on Orson Welles. It's too bad he died like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Actually, I think the Muppet movie was his very last movie. That was like 70, 78. All right. What the devil? A man yelled as the car door opened.
You don't want to run over your potential love interest. Oh, who is it? It's David, right?
David.
Yeah.
He stood up, or he turned around. No. Stood up out of his car. And how about he glared at me? That's what he did. Okay, he stood up out of his car and glared at me from over the top of his car's roof. Well, over... Let's see, glared at me.
She should be the one yelling at him.
Don't worry, she will. The other thing about David / Orson Welles is that Orson Welles had really dark eyes. I mean, he did have black hair, but he also had a very light pigmented skin. So he was kind of almost on the pasty side, if you will, but he had these insanely dark brown eyes, like almost black dark brown eyes. And so because of that, his stare was crazy intense. So let's see. What the devil? A man yelled as the car door opened. He stood up out of his car and glared at me, a dark scowl on his face. Are you asking to get run over? No, I said. Maybe if you slowed down a bit, you would have seen me. What are you doing here out here anyway? He said. Who the blazes are you? What are you doing here? I live here, I said. Who are you? Ah, so you're the nanny, he said, nodding. Guess you could call me that. Oh, he said, leaning against his car. I do a lot more than just make sure my ward is dressed, fed, and happy, I said. I have a college degree in special ed, and I'm making sure she's at or above her peers educationally. So not merely the help, he said, with a wry smile on his face. Being labeled helpful doesn't offend me, I said, and I get paid to educate that little girl, so I'm not merely anything. He turned to get back in his car. How about he sniffed? Because backstory time, he thinks he's like equal parts pissed and amused. He's pissed that he almost ran her over. He's pissed that she nearly caused an accident. But her little snippiness with him is actually kind of cute to him. Yeah, she's willing to stand up to me. That doesn't happen very often. Okay, so that's hence the sniff, the silly girl. So, okay, he sniffed. He turned to get back into the car. So I guess I'll see you at the house. If you're looking for David Kent, we get rid of the so. I don't like it. Okay. I guess I'll see you at the house. If you're looking for David Kent, he's not there. He turned his head as if he was about to say something when he suddenly disappeared behind the car door with a yelp of surprise. Are you okay? I said, rolling over to the other side of the sedan. I keep saying car, so I'm going to put sedan. A groan and a few explicitives answered me. The man had fallen in a weird position, halfway under the car, and sprawled out on the slushy road. Are you okay? I repeated. Does it look like I'm okay? He growled. He slid himself from underneath the car and tried to stand up. He nearly fell again. You look hurt, I said, rolling up closer to him. You think? He replied, trying to get off the ground. He grunted as his hurt leg didn't allow him to get the purchase he needed to rise. Come here a second, he said, looking up at me. I need to use your chair as leverage. I did as he asked and locked the brakes on my wheels. Using both the door and the footrest, he got up on his good leg and sat down in the driver's seat. Do you think you can drive? I said. Well enough, he said, rubbing his hand down the injured leg. You're still going to the house? You should go to the emergency room. His indignant stare answered my question. Yeah. It's like, don't tell me what to do. But I guess if you want to rest your leg a bit, I'll meet you at the house, I said, backing up. He shut the door and drove off down the drive at a decidedly slower pace than before. Addie stood in the open doorway, attempting to climb on the man. Let's see. When I arrived at the house, the sedan was parked in front, and Addie stood in the open doorway, attempting to climb on the man, yelling, David. she attempted to climb on the man, yelling, "David." I shook my head. He could have just told me who he was. David hobbled into the house with Addie jumping all around him. "Addie, lay off a second," he said. Her face fell, but she backed up. She noticed me coming into the house, and her exuberance transferred to me. David hopped over to a chair in the sitting room and sat down heavily. He pulled his jacket off and threw it on the couch. Painfully, he adjusted his injured knee before looking over at the two of us. "Don't just sit there in the doorway and heat the outside. Come over here." I gave Addie a little push. She needed very little prompting to fly over to her David and hug him excitedly. Well, we just get rid of excitedly. She started in on all the things we had done for school that day. She demanded to know where he had been and why he had been gone for so long. While she chatted at him, I took off my jacket and gloves. I rolled over to the living room and positioned myself across from them. I wanted to see David better. He wasn't a very tall man. He had a full head of black hair that curled up where it had grown a little too long. He was not what I would consider handsome. His eyebrows were a little too thick and broody. His face was round, and his lips full almost to the point of being pouty. And if you want to know what Orson Welles looks like, that's exactly what he looks like. He wasn't fat, and then Orson Welles did get fat eventually, but he wasn't fat back in the 40s. He wasn't fat, but rather on the stocky side. He turned his head to me. His sharply intelligent eyes watched me examine him. "So what possessed you to be in the middle of the road at this late hour?" "I was getting some exercise," I said. "Why were you going so fast?" "I always drive fast, and it's my driveway. I'll drive as fast as I like on it." "I'm surprised you haven't hit more deer then," I said. "I leave them alone and they leave me alone," he said. He got out his smartphone and turned a game on for Addie. She curled up next to him. She rested the back of her head on his chest. He quietly held her as she played, looking quite content. How about we get rid of quietly too? Because I'm sure he's not talking. I looked away to hide a smile. Children's instincts know when they are truly loved, even if the trust part took a little longer to earn. Despite how he acted or the things he said, I knew he loved that little girl. David's face winced when she shifted. "Thought you were a deer for a second." "You thought I was a deer?" I asked. "Yes," he said, watching Addie play her game. He looked up at me. "You look like you could be a forest creature." I rolled my eyes. "I don't see how me and my wheelchair could be mistaken for anything in the forest." He smirked. "Indeed. How long have you worked here?" "Cheryl didn't tell you about hiring me?" I asked. "Or the text I sent you?" Because she, a few months, right around the week she moved in, she sent him a text message saying, "By the way, this is who I am, grateful for the opportunity, blah, blah, blah." And then he never sent anything back. That's his way. "I'm sure I did," he said, looking down at the game again. "Cheryl's good about handling the minutia for me." "Minutia?" I said. "Your child's education is hardly minutia. It'll be the one thing in her life she'll be able to use in the real world when the people that love her won't be around anymore. I teach her to read so she can read signs or contracts or books. I'm teaching her math skills so one day she knows the value of money and can support herself. And we're working on coping skills so that her world isn't confined to a room or a house. For context also, as we're going through this, she's sort of snippy with him because she's running under the impression that he thinks he's too good to deal with his lower level employees. That's the assumption she makes because he never ever responds to her text messages, and he never responds to Addie's because Addie loves to take pictures and send them to him, and he gets them and he likes to look at them and stuff, but he doesn't feel the need to respond back to her. And Hannah is of the opposite opinion. If you text somebody, she expects that you should text her back, and he doesn't do that. So she's kind of like, he's Mr. Snotface, rich guy who thinks he's better than everybody else. He watched me through the entire speech and continued to stare at me. I felt the weight of that gaze, hoping my mouth hadn't got me in trouble. He let out a sigh and took the phone back from Addie, though she protested loudly. "Isn't it bedtime for you, young lady?" David said to Addie. Addie pouted, folded her arms, and resolutely stayed put. "We haven't had dinner yet." "We haven't had dinner yet," I said, unlocking my wheels. "You should get some ice on that." I pointed to his knee. "Would you like me to get you some while I get Addie her dinner?" "I will have Cheryl come and take me to the hospital. I think this is more than just a sprain." "Will we see you in the morning?" I said, more to satisfy my own curiosity than for any professional capacity. He hung his head down over his phone and texted furiously. I wasn't sure he'd even heard the question. I went to get Addie her dinner, but there was a part of me that hoped he'd stay. And that part would be the part who is infinitely intrigued by this really, gosh, the best description of him would be emo, grouchy, snippy. There's just something about him she can't quite, she wants to figure him out, basically. Because we're not dealing with love quite yet. She doesn't even know him. So you can't necessarily be in love with someone that you don't know at all, I guess, if you want to go with the theory of love at first sight, and it can happen, I guess. But that's not what's going on here. She wants him to stay because she's like, "You're somebody other than Brenda and Addie, and you're interesting." All right, next morning, Addie and I sat at the kitchen bar eating breakfast. A large van pulled up to the house. David's voice boomed from behind the door. "Is ridiculous and unnecessary," David said as Cheryl led him through the door. That actually should be a comma. His knee was bound in a black brace, resting on the leg rest of a clunky hospital wheelchair. "You didn't expect me to fit you and all those boxes you insisted on bringing in my little coupe, did you? Not to mention this metal monstrosity." "But a hired hearse, really?" She waved a hand at him. "You had more room, and you didn't have to go jumble your knee around. And it's not a hearse." A man cleared his throat. The driver of the van stood in the doorway holding a couple of bank boxes. "Come with me, I'll show you where to put those," Cheryl said to the man. "I have you to thank for this, you know," David said, scowling at me. "Not sure how I made you slip on the ice. I was a dozen paces away." Addie jumped off her bar stool and ran over to David. Tenderly, she petted his brace and cooed at it. You distracted me, he said, wheeling himself towards the kitchen. You're a distraction. Well, if that's the worst thing you'll ever call me, I'll take it. He shook his head, but I could see he tried to hide a smile. So what did the doctors say, if you don't mind me asking? Torn ACL, he said. And, Cheryl said, coming out of the office, the doctor says it's important that he take it easy until they can schedule his surgery, and then take it easy even more after his surgery. It's ridiculous, he said, then pointed at me. If she can get around in that thing, then I don't see why I can't. I don't have time for this. I'm not sure the doctor gave you much choice, Cheryl said, pulling out some things from the refrigerator and started making a sandwich. Just call it the wonders of modern technology. You have access to your files via cloud, and the ones you don't, I made sure I called your IT manager so you can VPN into your servers. You can video conference your meetings, print and fax, and all from the comfort of your home office. I'd say you're set for the time being. Cheryl placed the sandwich in front of David. Eat. We've been gone all night. You're not my mother anymore, David said. I never was, she said, but I don't hold that against you. Okay, children, I'm going to get some beauty sleep. Let me know if you need anything else, darling. I'm at your disposal. Hannah, make sure he doesn't sneak off. He can do everything he needs to do in his office. David pointed to the door, but Cheryl leaned over and kissed him on the cheek before walking out. I will push you to your office, David, Addie said. Not right now, Addie, David said as he took a bite of his sandwich. Why don't you go push Hannah to your schoolroom and get started with your work? She doesn't like me pushing her, Addie said. She gets mad when I do. She does, huh? David said, eyeing me. I'm capable of doing it myself, and it keeps my arms toned. You wouldn't want help, even if it makes getting around a little easier? Maybe I could pull your pant leg up every time you take a step. Would that help you get around easier? David looked stunned. Sorry, I said, taking in a breath. I didn't mean... It's something I'm used to people being stupid about. I know you didn't mean it like that. He nodded. How did you get in the wheelchair? I paused again. Well, I was about 11 years old, and my family and I were on our way to go shopping when a car whose driver was under the influence of painkillers going the opposite direction crossed the freeway median and slammed into our car. My parents died instantly. My sister only survived until we got to the hospital. They buckled me in, but I hated the body strap and had put it behind me. I was banged around pretty badly, including damaging my spine. When I woke up from my coma, I didn't have the use of my legs. Very young to lose your family and the use of your legs, he said. True, but you make do with what life throws at you, I said. He uttered a bitter laugh. Nice little platitude, but it's too bad it's not that simple. Life throws rotten lemons at you and kicks you in the face when you're down. But you're supposed to take all that and make lemonade. Beats feeling sorry for yourself, I said. His face darkened. Maybe throw them away and start over new. I've tried that, he said. You just end up with rotten limes instead. Well, if that's the way you want to look at it, Mr. Glass Half Empty, I prefer to look at the bright side, I said. It's worked out pretty well for me so far. I have a lot to be thankful for. Thankful, he said. The last words I would have expected to come out of your mouth, considering your circumstances. Why? I asked. What are you doing?
Making fish sticks.
Shh. Yes, I lost my parents, and I have to roll around in this thing. But by pure luck, I got the best foster family a person could ask for, assigned to me right out of the hospital. Not every kid in foster care is that lucky. Some get bounced around from family to family. Hey, Rhino, it's been a while. Dan and Marion took me home from the hospital and then raised me. They taught me the value of independence. I can do almost anything you can do. I can drive a car. I get myself ready in the morning. I have a college education and a good job. Not sure where and all that I can complain. I am actually doing pretty good. This is actually my book that I'm reading. How old are you, Hannah? David asked. I'll be 22 in July, I said. You haven't had enough life under your belt to have much to complain about. Give it time, he said. He turned his wheelchair and headed towards his home office. Nice talk, Hannah. I'll be busy the rest of the day, so just pretend I'm not here. True to his word, for the next couple of weeks, Addie and I saw very little of David, even though we knew he was in the house. The only sign of life was his occasional breaks for food and couriers knocking on the door, eager to pick up whatever it was David was sending out. His surgery day came, and he was gone for all of 24 hours before we heard him yelling at the medical transport van driver and Cheryl again. The driver pushed David towards his bedroom, and Cheryl came in looking exasperated. Looks like the surgery is a success, I said, with a smirk on my face. If bellowing around like a bull is a success, then yes, she said. I'll be right back. I will give him this medication the doctor gave me. It will put him nice and out for a few hours at least. Otherwise, he will try to get up and do stuff he's not supposed to be doing. You'll check in on him every once in a while. Sure, that won't be a problem, I said. Can I go see David? Addie said. No, dear, Cheryl said. He's in a grouchy mood, and he'd probably just yell at you. I had to put up with it all the way from the hospital. He's lucky he has you, Cheryl, I said. He may not say so, but it's still true. Darling, he is lucky to have me, but at the same time, I feel lucky to have him too. He's always been like family for me all these years, she said. When I first married his father, he was like a little puppy that would follow me around, offering to do things for me, and he defended me against his father, though he was punished for it. He's had it harder than most, but deep down, despite the gruff exterior, is a heart of gold. Nothing like his father or his brother ever were. I nodded. It surprised me, but it seemed to confirm what I had felt about him deep down. Someone who loved a child as much as I was sure he loved Addie could not be rotten to the core. All right, we've got time for one more chapter. I don't feel like I needed to do much to that one. It seems like I'm really awesome when it comes to dialogue, and then I start in with the descriptive, and it just all goes to pot. And if you're having problems with characterization, like with either David or Addie or Hannah, let me know, because I can't fix what I don't know is broken, because heaven knows I've read this thing like 8 times. So anyway, a few days after David got home from the hospital, a huge snowstorm hit. We tucked in and found that in the evenings David started joining us in the sitting room. He wouldn't say much, so Addie and I continued our normal doings. Addie would sing a song she had learned in school, or do a little dance to some song she found on her tablet. Then sometimes she and I would bundle up in blankets on the couch with hot cocoa and watch the flames in the gas fireplace. David sat in his ugly hospital wheelchair with a bandaged knee and stared into the flames. Addie and I had just sat down for dinner when the doorbell rang. Addie jumped up from her chair to answer it, but I made her sit back down. When I opened the door, there was a delivery man with a large package. I signed for it, and I needed to fix that. had him bring it into the kitchen. It was addressed to Addie. "What is it? What is it?" she said, practically jumping out of her chair. "Something for you," I said, and held up a hand before she could get off her chair. But eat all your dinner first before you can open it." Addie folded her arms and pouted. I gave her a look. She shoveled food into her mouth. "Slow down a bit," I said, chuckling. "You'll choke, and then you won't be able to open your package." Her fork slowed down a bit, and we ate the rest of dinner in silence. Addie eyeballed the presents sitting on the kitchen counter all through the rest of her meal. David rolled his way into the kitchen. "Would you like something to eat?" I asked him. He shook his head. "Oh, good, it came," he said, looking at the box. "What is it?" Addie said. "That, my dear," he said, "is for you." "My present," she said, clapping her hands. "Are you done eating?" I asked her. She hurried to eat the last bites and then jumped down from her chair. "What are you forgetting?" She made a noise and grabbed her dinner things and put them in the sink. And I hate that this girl, Addie, is actually based on my best friend's daughter, and she makes the funniest noise when she's irritated. She's like, and she like does this like tilty head and drops her shoulders and makes that noise, but it's not a noise you can describe. It just is a noise of annoyance. So she made a noise and grabbed her dinner things and put them in the sink. Fix that. "Can I open it now?" she asked. "Take it over to the couch," David said. "Open it there." "Do you always get her a present?" I asked him as we made our way to the couch. "Only when I've been gone a long time," he said. Addie turned the box around and around to find a place where she could get the box open. She looked up at me. I grabbed a butter knife from the counter and sliced open the packaging's tape. She pulled the bubble wrap from inside and gasped as she pulled out the pink box. She pulled the ribbon and opened the box to find a doll with long blonde hair staring back at her. "What is it?" I asked. "It's a dolly!" she all but screeched. She pulled the doll out of the box. "She looks like me!" Addie smoothed its long blonde hair pulled up into a high ponytail. Addie hugged the doll to her. "There's a brush!" "Keep looking," David said. Addie kept pulling things out of the box. "Pajamas! Oh, pajamas for my dolly and me! A dress! And one for my dolly!" Sure enough, there were matching pajamas and dresses for both Addie and the doll. David's face was impassive, but his eyes danced. "Can I try on the dress?" Addie said. "Yes, go into the downstairs bathroom and change," I said. "Change your dolly's dress, too." She gathered up her items and raced to get to the bathroom. In case you probably would have never guessed in a trillion years if you either don't own one or don't know any little girls, but the American Girl dolls is what this doll is based on. I mean, it's actually kind of sick. The doll itself is worth over $100. Like, bare minimum, standard, base model doll is $100. And then on top of that, there's like trillions of clothes and shoes and accessories, so like purses and hats, and they even have a wheelchair and a horse, and they have like tons of crap. And one of the other popular things with the doll is that it has Dolly and Me clothes, so you can get like a dress for you or for the child, and then the exact same dress in the doll size. And David knew Addie would absolutely love that, so that's why he got it for her. And she loves dolls, so the fact that the doll, oh, and by the way, the other thing about the American Girl dolls is that the piece of crap dolls that you could buy at Walmart usually only have about 5 or 6 rows of hair punched into the scalp of the doll. And but the American Girl dolls have hair punched all the way through the scalp area. So what that means is that you can actually do the doll's hair like you would a child's hair. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff, and there won't be these like funky bald pieces peeking out. So that's not necessarily important. I just love that about them. But the thing was, Maddie was never a doll girl. And my mom wanted to buy her one for Christmas one year, and I'm like, no. Nope, 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 nope. Because I can guarantee you that we would come into her room one day and find doll hair everywhere, and the doll looking like she went punk rock because Maddie cut her hair off. So, yeah, she never got an American Girl doll. Oh, and that was the other thing. The dolls can be customized to look like the child. So if the child has blue eyes, you get the doll with the blue eyes. She has Hispanic skin, so a darker toned skin, then you can have the darker toned skin. You can get like different hair colors, glasses, freckles, buck teeth, not buck teeth. I mean, it's crazy. So let's see. Yeah, and of course, David being rich, money is no object, so he could pretty much get anything and everything Addie would want for this doll and not really blink an eye at it. Okay. She loved it, I said. I should hope so, David said. All little girls love dolls, don't they? I shrugged. I guess there's a lot that do. You never had your own doll? Sure, Barbies and things, but there were so many kids in the house, I didn't really have toys that I could say were mine. We just sort of shared what we had. I preferred reading anyway, so I had quite the little library in my room. And now? I find I don't have much time for reading anymore except for what Addie and I work on, I said. By the time she's in bed and I'm settled, I'm usually ready for bed myself. Addie rushed from the room. The sequins on her dress sparkled in the firelight, and she twirled holding her doll out. We're twins, she said. Addie sat down on the floor, playing with her new doll. She cooed at it and brushed its hair and made her dance. David watched her with a soft look on his face, probably mirroring a similar one on mine. Children are so much easier to make content than adults, he commented. I guess that depends on the adult, I said, looking at some pictures of my family Marion had posted on Facebook. Are you saying you're easier to appease than other adults? Well, if adult is a proper definition for what you are, he said. I think if I can claim that I'm legally able to drink alcohol if I wanted to, that qualifies me as an adult, I said. The corner of David's mouth curled up. Touché. But I ask again, are you easily contented? I would say yes. I realize that I may not get everything I want when I want it, but that's okay, because I don't need everything the minute I want it. He grunted and stared at me for a while. What is it? I finally asked. Period. I had become a little uncomfortable under all the scrutiny. I was thinking about how you sometimes remind me of myself at your age, and reference, David's roughly 11 years older than she is. He's like in his early 30s. So I was thinking about how you sometimes remind me of myself at your age. I look at you and I see an echo of what I used to be. I see that fresh-faced optimism that can only be found in people that haven't known enough of life. You still know what trust is. You only see goodness. You look to your future and see it clear and unfettered and hopeful spreading out before you. I know because I was that. I'm not anymore. Life has been a cruel mistress, and she has whipped me and punished me. My future is no longer clear. My future is. My sins have become chains I haven't been able to remove. Be grateful that your inexperience grants you blissful ignorance. Sins? What was he talking about? Surely he didn't consider Addie a punishment for a sin he committed or a burdensome chain he had to endure. I told you earlier that I was a foster kid. Marion and Dan picked me up from the hospital when I was ready to leave, and I've been with them ever since. And in all the years that I was with them, we had a lot of kids come and go. I've seen women who had their children taken away from them because they were so addicted to drugs or alcohol that they could no longer care for their baby. Sometimes it's the wake-up call they needed to turn their lives around and get their kids back. I don't think anyone is past turning their lives around, regardless of the circumstances of their past or present. They just need something to inspire them to change. And you think I need that wake-up call, that inspiration to change, he said. If you feel that your life is not the way you want it to be, then yes. Find what your wake-up call is and then don't ignore it. Easier said than done, he said. Or at least, easier for you, because you've already done it. Done what? Overcome adversity? Found a clear road to your future, he said. Your story is truly inspirational. I rolled my eyes, and I took one long breath before responding. Inspiration, I spat. I just live my life like anyone does. The fact that I'm in a wheelchair is only one facet of that life. I play the hand I was dealt, and I don't whine about what a tough break I got. He waved his hand at me. I wasn't talking about your disability. I was talking about the loss of your parents and your remarkable clarity about what you want out of life. He pushed himself more upright on the couch. Did you think I was calling you inspirational because of your wheelchair? I don't even notice half the time. Seems you're the one who's more worried about it than I am. The heat of rage... Shh. The heat of rage in my cheeks turned to the heat of embarrassment. It's just sometimes I wonder if people take me at all seriously because they're so caught up in my being inspirational, or they assume that because I'm in a wheelchair that I must be mentally deficient or still a child. Mentally deficient, he said, shaking his head. No, definitely not that. Anyone mentally deficient would not have taken Addie under their wing and have her learning in leaps and bounds like you have. You don't think I notice, but I do. I looked down at my hands. Thank you. I love working with her. As you should, he said. May I ask you a question? Sure, I said. What is it that you want? What is down that clear path into a bright future? Isaac! Knock it off! Gosh. I think I want what anyone wants. I want a career that makes a difference in someone's life. I want a committed relationship with someone who loves me for me. I want children someday, too. He nodded. That's what I thought. There's something wrong with that? I asked. No, it's just that the younger me had those same wants. And you don't think you can have those now. It's not a matter of want anymore. I have what I have at this moment, and I must be reconciled with what I have. I don't have hope like you do that things will change for the better. But at least, for one small moment, I could see what I once wanted once upon a time. I sighed. What was he really trying to say when he talked so obscurely? I hoped that he could be more forthcoming, but he wasn't, and I wasn't quite brave enough to confront him about it. We sat in silence. He could be so odd. He was so cynical, and I wondered what happened to him that might have made him that way. Probably the terrible childhood that Cheryl had alluded to. And yet, despite the gruffness, and as much as he said he didn't believe in hope, he certainly questioned me an awful lot about my hopes. That gruffness, it almost seemed like it was a facade, a mask he put on to hide the fact that there was a human being with feelings underneath. "Do you like what you see?" he asked, amused. I realized I had been staring at him. "Sorry, I got lost in my thoughts," I said. Thoughts about what?" he said. "You, actually," I said. He looked surprised. "You have all these advantages, and yet you act like you have the worst life ever." "There are reasons for that," he said. "Sure, everyone has those," I said, "but you have more than most. Your life may not be perfect, but you have a lot to be grateful for." He looked to be mulling over what I said. I yawned and stretched. "I think I'm headed to bed," I said. "Need anything before I go up?" "No," he said. "Good night, Hannah." "Come on, Addie," I said. "Time for bed." And I helped her gather up the other parts of her present to take upstairs. Before I turned the corner to the elevator hall, I looked back at him. He watched me go with the oddest look on his face. I raised my hand and hurried to get upstairs, my heart pounding. Great. So, now we start to see the two of them intersecting. And one thing, I'm going to get all, English majory on you for a second, but one thing that I very rarely ever had anyone point out about the novel Jane Eyre, and particularly when people were trying to figure out what in the world, other than Jane being sort of sassy, what in the world did they see in each other? We know that she liked his intelligence and she liked talking to him, and he obviously liked talking to her, so their relationship was based at first on friendship. But then we have the other part of the dynamic. Just because you're friends doesn't mean that you're going to fall in love with that person. And just because you have something in common with a person doesn't mean that you're going to have a deep connection with that person. And so one of the things that I was trying to what I'm trying to establish in these chapters, as David's trying to recover from this surgery, is that it is about their amusement of each other, their fascination with each other, but it's also about the fact that they slowly realize on sort of a subconscious level that they are similar in spirit, because both of them are alone, and given in Hannah's case, she does have her foster family still, but in the case of Jane Eyre, she had no one. She had her aunt that hated her guts, but so in essence, she was alone too. Mr. Rochester was alone, she was alone, and so I think that that is where the bonding came from, was the realization that we understand each other on that subconscious level of, we don't have anybody else, but I could have you. Or when you speak and the pain is pouring out of the inflection in your voice when you're telling me things about yourself, it's not that I'm sympathizing with you. I know exactly what you're talking about. And you, that's where people who you would necessarily think would be right for each other. I mean, in the story in Jane Eyre, gosh, Mr. Rochester's like, if he's not already 40, he's like 41 or 42, and Jane is 18. I mean, that's a fairly large age gap. So what would people that separated in age have in common with each other enough to actually fall in love? Because the other point that um, the Bronte pointed out and was very specific about was that Jane and Rochester both were not good looking at all. She was very plain, and Mr. Rochester was not good looking. He was too, back in the Victorian era, you didn't want to have like a darker toned skin. You didn't want to have, dark black hair, and you didn't want these big bushy eyebrows, and you know, and then of course if you don't have a self-esteem enough to take care of yourself, then that kind of just adds to that whole being unattractive. And so, but then I was reading a part because I was writing for that other story this 2 days ago. I went back and I read one of my other favorite parts in Jane Eyre, which is the part where Rochester finally admits that he's in love with her, and then he asks her to marry him. And he said, and she basically tells him, oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought. That's sad. Nope, it's totally gone. Wow, that's awesome. Um, yeah, no clue. It's gone. Had something to do with them getting married. Had something to do with Jane standing up for herself or whatever. Um, anyway. Um, anyway, so as far as Dark Mountain is concerned, I did squeeze that gap a little closer because if you're in your 30s, you've had enough time to have some fairly bad things happen to you since you graduated from high school. And I know people that are like that, where they just had one disappointment after another, and it wasn't until they got into their 30s that their life really settled down, and which is what we're heading for in this particular situation. We want David to finally start to wonder if the life he had always wanted, the family, the love of a good person, if it's now in his grasp to have with Hannah, or with Rochester to Jane. But if you've read Jane Eyre, you know that Mr. Rochester makes some really, really stupid decisions on how he handled everything about his first marriage and Jane. And David will do the same thing, except for I had to change it a little bit because obviously you can't lock your first wife up in an attic in your house. I mean, I guess you could, but you're gonna get in really big trouble back in the Victorian era. What Rochester did for his first wife was far and away better than sending her to an asylum, She would have just been treated horribly at an asylum, whereas at least she had a room where she could be safe and be taken care of by Grace Poole and be in the comfort rather than in this asylum sitting in her own feces and being beaten and raped and all that other stuff that happened at those places. I had one more thing to say. Let's see. The other thing that I'm setting up for, and one of the things that I got the editors that I have talked to so far have said is that one of my biggest problems is that in my rush to get the story told, I didn't really have a good way of David doing something that would justify Hannah ditching the hot doctor and marrying David, because you have a situation where David's lied to her several times. Lied to her, and not only that, but the more, and this is something my husband helped me realize, the biggest insult was not necessarily the lies. That was bad enough. It was the fact that he treated her like the information he was withholding from her wasn't important enough for her to know, or that he was handling it and she didn't need to worry her pretty little head about it. That was kind of the attitude. Not that he felt disdain for for Hannah, or that he didn't trust her with that information. It was, I'm taking care of it. You don't need to worry about it because I'm here to take care of you. I guarantee you that attitude will not fly with any significant other for very long, because it's condescending. It's a condescending attitude to have, because if you are in a relationship with someone and you're both adults, the expectation is that if you've got skeletons in your closet and the person that you're with loves you enough to be with you, then the revelation of those skeletons will not be something that will make them run for the hills. And if it does, then maybe it wasn't meant to be. But the expectation is that you come into a committed relationship or a marriage knowing the things about that person that are important to know, like whether or not they've been sexually abused as a child, or whether they'd been to jail before, or whether they'd had, gender reassignment surgery. These are things you have to know about your partner, and if those things are kept from you, your partner has every reason to be upset with you. Period. The end. So here we have, so at the very end of these conversations about the drug addicted moms, the drug abusers, the lack of services and support for people who have these addictions and have families and don't have millions of dollars to just support them through a stint in rehab or jail, and allow them to keep their children, because sometimes the situation gets worse for the children outside of mom and dad's home. And Sometimes it is the wake-up call that they need, but then they don't have any support. And in fact, in this next chapter, she talks about that quite frequently, that it doesn't matter if she wants to get clean or not, for the sake of her children, or even for the sake of herself. There's no support mechanism for her to do that. She can't work, she has to be in rehab. And if she doesn't work and she's a single mom, then everybody in her family suffers because there's no money coming in. And I hate to dog on the social workers, because I actually have a couple of really, really good friends who do exactly the type of social work that Hannah's talking about, dealing with parents who are have drug addictions or alcoholism or whatever it is. And she deals with that on a daily basis. So I'm not going to, and to be honest, her workload is insane. So, there's always two sides to a story. But the main point that Hannah was trying to help David realize is that you've got all this money, and that's great. I'm so glad that you have the money to have a nice home and take care of your daughter the way she needs to be taken care of, and all these things. But there are other things that you could do with that money that would benefit people far beyond just hitting up the local food bank or getting their monthly check from the government. And so part of the other attraction for David to Hannah is that she's got all these ideas on how to help people in actionable and what's the word I'm looking for? So it's something they can act upon, and it's beneficial. It's not here, because we've run the gamut. When we first moved back to Utah, we were really poor, and we tried to sign up for, things like food stamps and whatnot, and help with our utilities and stuff. And we got denied every single time because I made too much money. I had a job, but my husband didn't. And it wasn't enough. My paycheck wasn't enough to put us in an apartment. But yet, he couldn't find a job. So anyway, it's a frustrating cycle of filling out a bunch of paperwork and applying for all these programs that you may or may not know are even out there. And you may get it, you may not. What's the point? What's the point of filling out all that paperwork just to find out you got denied? It's a vicious, in my opinion, it's a vicious cycle that a lot of people can't get out of. And so a lot of times they end up losing their children or their families permanently because they don't have any other options. So that will come up about later in the book, and I'm sorry I kind of went out on a tangent about that, but it comes up later in the book as the way David redeems himself in Hannah's eyes, because it's not enough for him to be sorry. It's not enough for him to be like, I really screwed up and I'm sorry, because sorry means that you'll never do it again. How do you prove you're not going to do that again? And one of the ways a friend of mine was telling me was that he needed to be her number one cheerleader, no matter what. Whether she was going to get back together with him or not, he needed to be her cheerleader in everything. And so the way I'm showing this is that not only did he take her ideas about a rehab center and supporting families of drug addicted people, but also that hearing about her with her work with at Spectrum Academy, which is the school for autistic kids. It's a charter school designed specifically for the needs of autistic kids. With her work, and people are praising her work there, and he's hearing about it, and he's like so proud of her. It's those types of things that allow you to look past, not necessarily look past, but at least come to accept that if maybe they can't necessarily do anything to prove they won't do it in the future, at least these other things that are being done, like opening up charities and opening up rehab centers and all these other things, being on the board of directors for a charity that deals specifically with autism. Um, all of these things, he's basically saying, I'm doing this because I want to. I'm doing this because you gave me the idea to do these things. I would have never thought of this stuff on my own. And whether or not you come back to me or not, it makes me proud that it's you that helped me come to this place in my life. I'd rather have you in it, but if you go with the rich doctor, then, or the hot doctor, then that will be, I'll be okay with that eventually. So, anyway, I think that's all for tonight, and next Wednesday, be back here again, probably editing Dark Mountain again. I'm in the full-blown middle of doing Camp NaNoWriMo for April. Still off, not finished, but I ended up working on 2 books at the same time. I'm insane, I know. And then wanted to put in a plug for the Romance Writers group. If you are a writer and you write romance of any subgenre except erotica, then I have made a Discord community for romance writers. Everyone is welcome to come in and join the party, basically. So it's on Discord mostly. There's a website if you want to check it out. It's romancewritersgroup.wordpress.com, and that will get you the links to where you need to go, what the whole thing shebang about the writers group is, and the calendar. And lastly, next Tuesday, is it next Tuesday? Let me make sure. No, Tuesday following. Yeah, Tuesday following, we are having what will technically be our first critique group. Bring 1 to 5 pages of a part of your manuscript so that we can gather together, read these pieces of manuscript, and then help each other work out how to make it better. That will be at 3 o'clock Mountain Standard Time on Tuesday. And with these types of groups, they will be recorded on Twitch so that later people can come in and watch those videos if they can't make it. So anyway, if you have any questions, I'm on Twitter all the time at Whitney Writes Book, and then I've got Facebook page, same at, and oh, sorry, I'm a dork. My Twitter page is Whitney_author, but my Facebook page is Whitney Writes Book, and then I've also got 1 completed novel and 1 serialized novel going right now on Wattpad under Whitney Writes Book as well. So if you're interested in seeing my work, it's not perfect because it's on Wattpad, but it is an example of how I write, and hopefully when we get Dark Mountain done to a certain extent and I can freaking afford it, because right now, editing, me paying out of my pocket to edit Dark Mountain will cost me a little over $1,000, which I don't have. So, fun times. Anyway, good night, everybody. Thank you for showing up, Cliff. You're amazing. Yeah, and if you have any questions, just send me a jingle, or if you need an invite to Discord, let me know that too. Yeah, $1,000.